Hi, it's lovely to be here this evening. When I work in the north, I just love it. People are so much nicer than down south. I spent 25 years in IT, culminating in being an exec in charge of massive application development teams in the historic days when we had mainframes and long development processes that might go on even for 2 years. And I was fascinated when I started reading about Agile, because I stopped that career and had a second career, but I was fascinated recently when I started reading about the Agile approach. And it got me thinking about, if I was recruiting a team now, an applications development team, what sort of people would I be looking for? Would that be different than when I was doing it years ago? Would I be looking for different qualities? And the answer for me was yes, actually. One of the things I discovered after 25 years in IT, I was asked if I'd like to go on a leadership program. So having led people for bloody years, I was then asked, would you like to go and do a leadership program to develop yourself as a leader? And I thought, yeah, that sounds great. I got to day 3 of the 5-day program, and I realized my belief that I'd been successful in IT because I was a great business systems analyst was not actually the whole truth. I'd done really well because I was actually a servant leader, but I knew nothing about that. I didn't know about leadership. It wasn't a word that was even in my head, whereas now we talk about leadership all the time. And having had that insight, I then left IT, and I've spent the last 20-odd years working with mainly senior leaders, IT professionals, individual contributors, helping them look at their leadership and developing their leadership. Not just servant leadership, but leadership in general. And what really motivates me is, when we look out at society, look at what's been in the news recently. So we've got Philip Green with BHS, we've got Sports Direct. You could look around the world at some of the despotic leaders we've got, Mugabe, Assad. The world is crying out for better leadership, whether it's out there in society or whether it's in our businesses. And servant leadership to me is one of the philosophies around leading that we already know is proven. There are over 100 companies in America that have been using this approach for a long, long time, this philosophy. Southwest Airlines, for example, TD Industries, they have outperformed their competition for the last 30 years, and they attribute a lot of that to the fact that they have a servant leader approach. So tonight I was thinking, I understand there's a whole range of people here. There's scrum masters, there's coaches, there's programmers, there's testers, there's managers. Am I leaving anyone out? No? IT recruiters, thank you very much. Okay. And whatever role you're in, whatever part you play in the Agile world, how you lead others can be the critical difference between success or failure. I've read a few essays by experts on Agile talking, and they keep mentioning, and a servant leader approach is the one you need, full stop. So I'm imagining how many of you here tonight are actually curious about servant leadership. So not just here because there's beer, but yeah, quite a few people, yeah. So I hope what I can do, I've only got 30 minutes, but I hope what I can do is whet your appetites about what is servant leadership, what is the philosophy behind it, what's important about it. And the great news is that the neuroscience that's going on at the moment, our new understanding of how the human brain works, completely underpins this approach. So something that was written about by Robert Greenleaf 60 years ago is now being completely validated by what we know about the human brain, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So let's have a look at servant leadership. One way you could think about it is it's a move away from the ego-led leadership style that we see. I've worked a lot with investment banks. There's egos walking around everywhere. They're competitive with each other. They're interested in winning points against each other. They're not particularly helping people collaborate and work together. The essence of servant leadership is to move away from ego leadership and to move towards having this as a philosophy. This is just one way of looking at it. In the old days, a leader was expected, or a manager was expected, there's that 2-year development project. They're expected to know what's happening in July, what's happening in December, what the outputs are going to be. So they're expected to know stuff a long way out. Servant leadership, if you imagine sometimes your projects are a bit like walking up a steep path with a drop on one side, not quite sure what's round the next rock, what's round the next corner. And I know projects can often feel like that when you think, oh God, what could happen next? A servant leader would be saying, you can never see the full path. Nobody can do that. The important thing is to do the next right thing. And in servant leadership, the next right thing is about enabling other people. So I'm going to read you some quotes from people who have been successful servant leaders and who've written about it extensively and who are interested in helping people understand what it is. So the goal of many leaders is to get people to think more highly of themselves, of the leader. Aren't I great? Look at the profits this year. Look at the turnover. Look at the rewards I'm getting. Look at the bonus I'm getting. I must be a really clever chap or chapess. Yeah. The goal of a great leader is to help other people think more highly of themselves. So at the core of servant leadership is a real intention to help other people be their best, to behave in ways with them that really elicits growth, learning, risk-taking, that helps people's confidence go up. And when I think of the Agile process, you know, the one thing that really came out at me was that the people on the Agile team would need some emotional maturity. They would need to have some self-awareness. You know, when you're asking people to stand up in the scrum and say what's not gone well in their, you know, work responsibilities and why that is, you would need people who aren't about blaming others, but who would be able to give facts, be able to speak clearly themselves. And I think that requires emotional maturity. And we can develop that when there's a climate in which there isn't blame and where there is acknowledgement of achievements and a desire to look at the facts and work with the facts, which I understand is at the heart of the Agile approach. So another quote, there is no more noble occupation in the world than to assist another human being or to help someone succeed. And some of you may be, you know, we live in quite a cynical world, don't we? Quite a narcissistic world. Some of you may be thinking, well, it's hard enough to make sure I'm looking after myself at work. This sounds very altruistic. This sounds very idealistic. Well, at one level, it is both those things. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about why that's a wise approach to take when you're a leader. And you know, you can be a leader if you're a coder. You can be a leader for the other coders. You know, we human beings follow people who we can trust. And we follow people who we respect and who may have thought leadership or may just be very supportive. So to be a leader, you don't have to be the CEO. You could be any role in that team. You can provide leadership to other people. So this is a bit lengthy. I'm sorry, it's a bit much to have on a slide, but I'm going to finish the quotes with this. This is from Steve Miller, who was head of Royal Dutch Shell, which was a massively successful oil company for years. No leader can possibly have all the answers. The actual solutions about how to best meet the challenges of the moment have to be made by the people closest to the action. My goodness, doesn't that fit well with Agile philosophy, with the Agile development philosophy? The leader has to find the way to empower those frontline people, to challenge them, to provide them with the resources they need, and then to hold them accountable. So this isn't all about being soft and fluffy all the time. You know, we do need people to deliver, and we do need to hold people accountable. And a good leader will do that in a constructive way, not a destructive way. As they struggle with this challenge, the leader becomes their coach, teacher, facilitator. So those are all words that apply to being a servant leader. So you can have any of those caps on when you're being a servant leader. Change how you define leadership, and you change how you run a company. You know, I've been in several hundred companies over the years as a consultant on leadership and also in IT. And the quality of the leadership is tangible the minute you walk through the door. Are people nervous? Are they confident? Do they speak up in meetings? Do they sound as if they know what they're doing is really relevant? You know, that comes from the sort of conversations leaders have with the people who work in the organisation. Doesn't that happen by accident? So what does the word servant mean to you? When you hear the word servant, I hate the phrase servant leadership. What does it bring up for you, that word, just servant? Just call out?
Someone lower down the food chain.
Someone lower down, so it immediately implies a hierarchy?
Yep.
Yeah, what else?
Helping.
Helping?
Yeah.
Okay, so servant could be a helper. Okay, what else?
Doing what you're told.
Doing what you're told. So you're a servant, I'm the leader, I'm going to tell you what to do. Yeah. Any other? Just one more?
Deference?
Deference. So, oh, okay. So deference to the leader?
Yeah, well, class, prestige sort of aspect to it.
Yeah, yeah. So in our culture, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure in some other cultures, the word servant, my grandparents lived in India for 40 years. They had servants all their lives. My mother came to England, she couldn't dress herself because she's had an ayah that did all her buttons up and got her dressed in the morning. And, you know, this sort of servant leadership has nothing to do with asking people to work for low wages, to doff their hats, their caps to you, to grovel in front of you, to see you as superior. Has nothing to do with that at all. In fact, it's the other way around. It's saying, be a leader who, instead of expecting others to be in your service and be servants to you, be a leader in service to your people. So see your role as to enable, to teach, to increase confidence, to help people grow, to help people be the best they can, to create the leaders of tomorrow. And that is the underlying meaning of the title servant leader. It's the opposite of what most people think. So no one's being servile, but the leader is being of service to the followers. So I'm going to put up a list of attributes, because a lot of people say, well, okay, the theory is fine, but what does that actually mean when I'm in a scrum or when I'm coaching somebody or when I'm with a difficult client? What does it actually mean in terms of behaviour? So these would be typical characteristics, stroke behaviours of a servant leader. So there's someone that doesn't need to be right all the time. They don't need that their view is the prevailing view. They are open to, you know, maybe that new coder coming in and saying, oh, why don't we do it this way? Yeah. So they're open to other people being as smart as them, and maybe even smarter sometimes, and being creative and having other ideas. And they're prepared to work with that diversity rather than say there's just one way. So they're open to that. They cultivate a culture of trust. So I think integrity is behind that. So someone who creates trust is someone who is trustworthy. So if you're in a meeting with someone and they pretend to be, you know, very warm to somebody, and then as they're leaving the meeting, they turn to you and say, oh, that bastard, you know, I don't like being in the meeting with them. If there's a bit of two-facedness going on, are you going to trust that person? Because if they're talking like that about that person, maybe they'll do that about me one day. So a servant leader is straightforward and honest, isn't playing games, isn't being manipulative, isn't saying one thing and doing another, or doing one thing and saying another. They are true to themselves and they're trustworthy. They always have in mind, how can I help this other person develop so that they could be a leader? They might be a leader as a coder, they might be a leader as a scrum master. It doesn't matter what role they're in. How can I help that person grow and develop, make the most of themselves? As opposed to an ego leader who might want to put them down in a meeting in order to feel better themselves. I'm cleverer than you, I'm more powerful than you. Oh, you know, that'll never work. You've made a suggestion, but actually I'm going to slap you down and reduce your confidence rather than increase it. So they always have in mind, how can I create opportunities for this person to grow? How can I help them through coaching them to learn from what's happened? So mistake is a learning opportunity. We don't mind mistakes as long as there's learning. Yeah? And as a leader, I would take the time to have the conversation. What have you learnt from that experience? How would you handle it differently next time? Who would you ask for help if you found yourself getting into that state? Rather than, well, that was really bad, wasn't it? I don't want to see you do that again. So it's moving from the parental and the status orientated to a genuine desire to help that person learn how to do it better next time. Helps people with life issues. So a servant leader is not just seeing the person in role, they're having a sense of, you know, is there stuff going on at home? Are they stressed about something? So you're not being a counsellor, you know, you're not sort of taking on that responsibility, but you're taking account of what you know about the person's wider life. You're not just seeing them. I was reading about Sports Direct and how they've been operating. Have other people here been reading about them? Yeah? Most people on zero contracts. A lot of people in their warehouse being paid below the minimum wage. You know, they're not respecting those people. They're not creating a culture of trust. They're using them. You know, they're just numbers on a piece of paper. Servant leadership is the opposite of that. It's valuing every individual for what they bring. They're encouraging. So, you know, something's gone wrong, so I'll say to the person, look, I might tell a story about how something went wrong for me when I was at their stage of their career, whatever that is. in order to help them relax and understand we all make mistakes. That's how we learn. Every person in this room has learnt most of what they know through making a mistake and learning from it, particularly when we're children, actually, when we're less embarrassed about making mistakes. Because, of course, when we get to the ages we are in here, when you get as ancient as me, we don't like being seen to make mistakes. We want to be seen as competent. But actually modelling for other people that it's okay not to know, it's okay to find something ambiguous and to need to ask questions. If we model that as leaders, we encourage others to do that too. Sells instead of tells. So have you come across that before in management models and things? What we mean by that is, so you tell the person the benefits of them taking part or working a particular way or joining you in something. You sell them on the benefits to them rather than telling them you will do it this way because I'm the leader and I'm telling you do it this way. So it's a sort of reversal of that. It's wanting to engage the person with why is this a benefit for you to do it this way. And they think primarily, a servant leader thinks primarily about you. So when you are leading people, you're focusing on the other person rather than on yourself. What can I do to help? What's going on here? Is this person needing a bit of a confidence booster? Are they overconfident? What impact are they having on others? How can I influence that? So you're thinking about the yous in the room, not the me's. Leaders, all good leaders should be thinking long term, because if we were doing a more generic talk about leadership in general, if I draw the difference between a leader and a leader is someone, in my view, who is always future orientated. They're looking at where am I taking this business? Who do I need to make that happen? How do I need to develop the people, the services, the products in order to get us there? So the leader is future orientated. So when I'm looking at my team, I'm thinking, how can I bring these people on? What could they be doing next year if I give them the opportunities to do that? So you're thinking about the future. Managing is also very important, but it's much more about control and evaluation and assessment and the harder things, the measures we have to have in a business in order that it doesn't collapse and go to the wall. And a servant leader acts with humility. And I know in today's day and age, where was I the other day? I think I was in London. And every other person was taking selfies. And then my husband and I went to a restaurant and people were taking selfies of themselves in the restaurant. It's like me, the whole time. And I think we live in an age where people are very self-focused. And actually to be a servant leader, you need to be other-focused. It's the sort of opposite of that. And not always singing your own praises or saying what you've achieved, but actually asking others, what do you want? What have you achieved? How are things going for you? So I'm going to come back to this list in a minute and ask you to do something in the group. I just need to check the time. Roy, I started a bit late, about 10 past, so is it okay if I go on until 22? Great, lovely, okay, thank you. So can I introduce, do any of you take New Scientist or read about neuroscience or have any interest in it? No? A bit? A few people? Okay. I'm bringing this up because often when you talk philosophically about something to a group of human beings, some people quite understandably are going to say, well, what are the facts? How do we know this works? Why would it work? Why should I put effort into being this sort of leader rather than the traditional top-down sort of leader? Why on earth would I do that? Well, luckily for people who work in my field, neuroscience is giving us those answers. So for once, same with coaching, same true of coaching. People ask, why does this work? Well, we know now. Most of our behaviour as adults comes out of pathways that are already laid down in our brain, like connections in the brain that are called neural pathways. And that when there's a stimulus in front of us of a situation we've been in before, there will be a neural pathway laid down to tell us so that we can instruct ourselves how to respond. So it becomes unconscious in the end. So most of what we do, we talk about free will, but 90% of what we do in a day is already programmed. We've already put it's a bit of programming, a neural pathway down to tell us how to cope with that situation. So it's a bit knee-jerk. It's a bit, this happens, so I behave like this. Yeah. When you're a leader and you want people to change what they're doing or learn something, you need their brain to be in a state where it is open to change. Because to change behaviour, say you've got someone very defensive in the scrum and you're trying to coach them to be less defensive because it's not helping them, it doesn't help the team, but actually it's very live for them, that feeling of being defensive, of being exposed through the scrum. So you might set about to coach them. But in order for them to be open to changing that neural pathway, their brain has to be relaxed. And what neuroscience has told us is that if the person who you want to have grow or change is having a positive emotion in their interaction with you, so they're feeling confident, or they're feeling optimistic, or they're feeling happy, joyful, trusting. Trust is an enormous pivot for this. What happens is the actual cells in your brain, this is physically observed, do what's called they have high plasticity, which means they're very open for business. So it's as if when the opposite is true and you're frightened and defensive, it's like a shell closes down on your neural pathway, individual cells, and we go back to old behaviour. We can't, you all will have seen this in a pub where there's a fight starts or something. People go straight into fight or flight. You know that we learnt about in biology? Fight, flight or freeze. That's when the brain shuts down for business and it's gone back to a very base way of responding. So servant leadership, the idea is you genuinely are trustworthy, you build trust with people, you speak to them with respect, you help them get learning opportunities, and through the building of that trust and culture, you open the brain in others to being ready for change and learning. And you'll find people embrace things, lay down a new neural pathway, change an existing neural pathway. You can't do it without the positive emotion. It's impossible. So people often think you can rule by fear. What you get with fear is you get robotic behaviour. People go into survival mode, the cells close down, and they just do same old, same old. They don't do anything novel or helpful. Okay, I'm just going to take a pause there. Any questions about what I've said so far? Is what I'm saying making sense to you? Does it add up? You're human beings. I'm talking about us as human beings and what we know about ourselves. If you think of, if you have a problem, it's probably much easier to talk to a friend or a parent or someone you trust than go to, a work colleague who you haven't got a very good relationship with. When we trust people, we are more likely to be open and to talk about real things and to talk about them in ways that are helpful to change, to help us change. So I'm going to ask you to do a little activity now, if you will. It will mean you talking to a neighbour. So these are the core attributes of a servant leader. You're not trying to be Mr. or Mrs. Perfect. What you're trying to do is hold these lightly when you're in situations and think, am I being true to this approach? Am I really listening to this person? Am I asking questions that draw them out rather than make them feel they've done something wrong? Am I able to challenge them in a way that challenges the issue rather than makes the person feel small? Am I speaking in a judgmental voice, or am I speaking in an encouraging voice? What is it I'm doing in that moment? So this is the same list, and this is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to look at the list. We've only got a few minutes to do this. Find one thing on that list that you know you do, a quality that you already know you have and that you exercise at work. Something, if your colleague was here, they'd say, yeah, I see you do that. I see you encourage people. I see you cultivate a culture of trust by being trustworthy. So find just one of those things that you think is about you, that you're proud to know that you exercise that at work. And find the one that turns you off the most. And that you think, God, why would anyone ask me to do that? I mean, this last one, acts with humility. When I first saw that, I thought, why would I want to act with humility when I want people to trust me and see me as a strong leader? How is humility fitting with that? Well, of course, I now know it's really about just letting the ego stuff go, talking more about you than about I. So for me, that was the one I rejected and didn't like initially. I had to work to develop a liking for being like that. So I just want to check. So one thing you know you do already that's a servant leader characteristic that you recognise in yourself. One thing that you're finding a bit iffy, I'm not sure about that. And then turn to the person next to you. If there's an odd number in the row, you might have to move and find someone who hasn't got a partner. And just quickly tell them what the two items are, how you see, if it was a positive one, how do you see that you contribute to developing a culture of trust, for example? What is it you do that does that? And what it is that's distasteful to you about the one you're not doing or that you find a bit alien. Yeah? And you both do that, so it's literally 2 or 3 minutes each way. Can I just ask you to pause a minute? Just one more thing. I hope you've both had a chance to talk. I'm amazed at the amount of energy when people are talking about this. Just say to your partner, just think about if you wanted to strengthen one of those behaviours on that list, it doesn't have to be the one you don't like so much, but if you wanted to just strengthen one thing, what would it be? What would you need to do that? Okay. So it might be, for example, if you're not a good listener, you might say, I need to be a bit more rigorous when someone's telling me something that's important to them, to really focus on the person and make sure I'm really taking in what they're saying, for example. Yeah? So just very quickly, just literally a minute for both of you to speak. What small thing could you do to strengthen one of these? Lovely, okay. And thank you for being so engaged. I really appreciated your openness and friendliness at the beginning, and then actually getting stuck in with that activity I asked you to do. So thank you very much. And I hope I meet some of you again, maybe at another one of these. So thank you.